Well, what would be wrong with changing the human digestive tract so that people could eat hay, and in fact, wouldn't that help with the food problem of the world?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that that is in fact happening. Up at General Electric in Schenectady, New York, scientists are at work on genetically altering the human stomach so that people can consume hay and grass like a cow does now. That is a possible solution to the food problem. After all, 15 million people die of starvation every year on this planet. It just seems to me that we're shifting our focus incorrectly. By changing our human digestive system, we make genetic changes that are irreversible. And I would rather see a simple political and social solution to the redistribution of food question, rather than making an irreversible change in our genetic makeup. It's such a tempting thing just to change our stomachs. Similarly, you could look at the fact that according to the government, 1 out of every 4 workers in the country daily is exposed to chemicals at the workplace that can cause cancer and a whole host of other diseases. Now, one solution, I will grant you, is to simply change our genes so that we won't get cancer from those chemicals. I think a much more reasonable solution is to clean up our environment, to change our notion of production and the way we want to live our lives, and keep ourselves genetically the same. Once we begin that tinkering and that rearranging process, I just think we open ourselves to tremendous problems.
Well, what would be wrong with cloning to ensure the compatible transplanting of organs?
Yes, cloning is, again, a concept that will be reality in 10 years or so. We can already clone frogs and mice and some other mammals. What we do is take a single cell from my finger, stimulate it to grow, and it would produce a biological carbon copy to me. And scientists have said, well, it's great for organ transplants, just as you mentioned. It gets into problems, though. What are the rights of a clone? You know, this country has gone through a long period of racism. One scientist has said, what will clonism be like? What is the right of a person that is just a biological carbon copy? Thousands of that person, all very similar. It begins to raise all kinds of legal questions, you know, and social questions. And again, do we want to have, many people talk about cloning sex symbols, right, as sort of a titillating thing. Do we want to have 1 million, you know, Burt Reynolds or Farrah Fawcett Majors walking around in the world? Do we want to clone, you know, political leaders, presidents, former presidents, you know, in exile? Who knows? It just raises a lot of questions I don't think we're ready to deal with yet. There's tremendous work going on in the mind, and this is sort of the ominous aspect of genetic engineering to me. After all, if we're going to fix an automobile, we don't look just at the chassis, we go right to the motor, what makes the car run. Similarly, we will go to the mind. Right now, scientists, for instance, can transfer memory from one rat, can extract chemicals from one rat's brain and put it into another rat, and that rat, second rat, will know the tricks that the first has learned. We can block memory. We can induce wild happiness in you chemically or electrically. Just stimulate you, and I could tell you the worst thing in the world, and you would burst out laughing in happiness. And this is proven. This is happening. And if we're going to begin altering people's minds, it's a very powerful social control mechanism. It's just, I think, again, everything in this field is so open to abuse. And we can see what's happened with much of our other science and technology. Are we willing to get into it? I would like to see us step back from it and say, let's take a serious look. Maybe we don't want to proceed.
Is a clone a human being?
Well, that's an interesting question, whether a clone is a human being or not. Is a test tube baby a human being? Again, we just don't know. You know, what both we have to consider legally, is a clone a human being, and so socially in our perception. I can tell you one thing that already is a problem. Artificial insemination is a process that through which 1 million people in this society, 1 out of every 200 of us, have been born through the technique of artificial insemination. And yet the courts have not even been able to determine yet if a child created through that process can be the heir of its parents. There are all kinds of court cases going on right now about the legal rights of a person conceived through artificial insemination. And that is just very hardly dissimilar at all from the normal procreative process. So when we start talking about cloning, I think what we get into is the notion that a scientist can simply take a cell from his body, grow it into a person, a genetic duplicate to him in a laboratory, and we could just as easily regard that new life form as a product, as just an organism that has been grown. Perhaps a clone doesn't have any rights at all. Again, You know, we don't even know the questions to ask in many of these cases.
Again, how far has the cloning technique been perfected?
Yes, it's important for everybody to understand that, as far as we know at least, there are no human clones out there in the world among us. Yet is definitely the word that should be added. Top scientists like Joshua Lutterberg, a Nobel Prize winner at Stanford, says that he would be surprised if the first clone did not emerge from the laboratory anytime from 0 right now to 15 years from now. We have, in fact, as I've mentioned before, cloned frogs, cloned mice, cloned vegetables. So we are perhaps 10 or 15 years away. Test tube babies, perhaps 15 or 20 years away, says James Watson, another Harvard Nobel Prize winner. Genetic surgery to change your traits, perhaps we're talking about 5 or 10 years. So while we are talking about a period that's down the road somewhat, it's not very far down the road.
What was your purpose in writing the book, Who Should Play God?
My background is not as a scientist. I've been looking into this field of human genetic engineering for the last 2 years. My motivation initially was I began, as many people have in recent years, reading a number of articles, hearing things about genetic engineering, recombinant DNA and clones and all of that. And at first it struck me as science fiction, and it was sort of interesting. And then I looked at it more and more, and I grew concerned. And really my motivation for writing the book and for being involved in speaking and attempting to communicate about this field of science is that I know, I'm 27 years old, I know I will be living in that age that is already being created, that my children and grandchildren will be living in that age. And frankly, it disturbs me very greatly. I am not willing, if you will, to live in a world that is out of my control, where people's genes are manipulated at will, where human life will have so little value, and I truly believe that is the ultimate conclusion of this, where the individual is not valued for him or herself, but simply seen for that person's genetic qualities. So I got involved out of personal concern, absolutely, that was my motivation. It started as sort of a scary feeling in my gut. I've been able to stand off from it a little bit and just see it as one of the key social issues, not just scientific, but social and theological and political and economic issues that has ever faced a society and will definitely face us in the years to come.
Passed a sign in Chicago the other day on the side of an old body repair place. Free estimates, now $5. And insurance guys, you know, tell you have to get 3 estimates, see? So they go get these, and this guy was giving estimates all the time, but nobody ever brought him work. So he started charging for his free estimates. And then a sign in a Mississippi restaurant the other day by the cash register in ballpoint on the back of a shirt collar. Okay, part-time woman wanted. Now, those things, it's everywhere. The person I know with a good sense of humor doesn't spend his time memorizing everything at the bottom of the page in Reader's Digest. He's a person that, you know, he notices and pays it. And those are the fun, and the earthy old wits that you see all the time out here. Young preacher one time up in Kentucky was preaching over in Indiana and was just letting this little rural congregation have all the great insight he could pour on them. And after the service, since nobody complimented him, he asked his host at lunch what he thought of the sermon of the morning, and the old farmer kind of grinned and said, "Well, son, you got your wick so high, I think you sooted your chimney." See, now, that is a beautiful way to say it, and those are the people that I think are hilarious. It's just native to you, you know.
Well, you, being a Christian entertainer, don't necessarily particularly like that label, I understand.
Well, yeah, I guess so. It's kind of like being a Christian car dealer or a Christian towel layer or something else. I'd like to think that because I'm a Christian, it picks up on what Khalil Gibran says in The Prophet when he talks about labor or about work. He said, if I'm a seamstress, I should make a dress for the public as I would make it for my beloved, because I want to put my expertise into it. If I'm building a house, I'm building a house for someone as though my beloved and I were going to live in it. I want to give that quality of excellence. We're really in a bad shape today. There are not going to be any plastic antiques, you know, and the old craftsmen are dying off. Well, it's kind of that way with vocation. Much too much of our vocation is a way to earn shekels so we can afford a recreation vehicle to get away from it on the weekends. I like work and vocation to be part of who I am, and so I think my Christian faith calls me to have a sense of integrity about the way I do my thing. And I've spent most of my time in church, so I tell church stories. You know, like, Brother Meadows, my pastor when I was in high school, trying to baptize Myrtle Hawkins one night, and she was about twice his size. In fact, she almost outweighed our junior class. And Myrtle is trying to get down the steps, and the pastor, who is 5'2", is trying to help her, and she fell on him. Just wah, man, all the way under. Tidal wave hits the choir. Everybody's sloshed, and he got water in his waders, and they ballooned, and we nearly lost him. And as I say, he wouldn't go back into baptistry again without a rope under his arms, and either two deacons or Myrtle Hawkins on the other end of it, you know. But that doesn't make that necessarily Christian humor just because it happened in church. I could also tell you a silly thing that happened with data processing down at the bank. But I have a sense of commitment to the fact, pardon me, that I don't have to entertain people with dirty humor. And I don't have to entertain them with a lot of cheap shots. I don't entertain them with sarcasm and a little satire occasionally, because I love to zing Baptists more than anybody in the world. We're the pickiest, most uptight folks in God's creation. And I love to remind us that we think we're hilarious and we think we're wonderful and we think we're special. And I think if God hadn't had a sense of humor, he wouldn't have thought Baptists up to start with. We're kind of weird, and I love to tease us about that. But I do a lot of my stuff in church, and I'd like to be able to go in and entertain in a church basement and do the very same program the next day for a banking association somewhere, you see. I don't think I have to do it any differently.
Grady, it's been fascinating talking with you. We certainly appreciate your visit, and I know that everyone that heard you this week here in Montgomery felt the same way, and we wish you the best, and maybe our paths will cross again someday.
Let's plan for them, too. That'd be fun. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Grady.
Mr. Floyd, you just have a wealth of knowledge and interesting little stories about all of the communities in the outlying areas. How did you pick that up?
Well, I've just done a lot of listening as I've traveled the length and breadth of Alabama during the last 10 years particularly, and I think if you really want to find out what's going on in a community, if you can stop and for a moment and have a soft drink around a pot-bellied stove, you can hear a lot of things and you not only hear very judicious appraisals of what people are thinking, but how they feel about all matters that relate to them. And then they generally like to share their stories with you. Many times, much of our history is not recorded, and so we have to go out and listen to it. And then when we consult the printed pages to see how that compares with what we've heard, then we really get a better picture of what did happen in Alabama during the last 10,000 years.
Have you found as you travel the state that people are interested in their history?
Yes, I found that Alabamians are very proud of things that have happened here, and I think this is because most Alabamians now realize that our heritage is black and red as well as white, and that all ethnic groups contributed to our heritage. For example, blacks built many of the big, beautiful mansions and other residential and commercial and industrial landmarks in Alabama. Their craftsmanship is reflected in those buildings. And then we all, I think, many Alabamians are part Indian. They have some Indian blood, and they also are very proud of the fact that Alabama had the Creeks, Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, and Seminole Indians all living within the borders of our state.
Well, is this being reflected now in a movement toward preserving our historical structures?
Yes, it is, Ivy. I am finding in Alabama that people are salvaging selected buildings of every era, of every generation, and they're restoring Greek Revival, Victorian, Gothic, Richardsonian, and every other architectural form. And there's a great interest in log architecture as well, and just plain old board and batten buildings that were built along the coast and built in the interior of the state.
There seems to be movement all the way across the country to take old warehouses and old buildings and to recycle them, old houses too, and to recycle them for updated use.
I think that that's primarily because of a rising interest during the bicentennial in America's heritage, and then more and more interest in restoring our older buildings because we should conserve those human resources that humans have built in the past. And then the Tax Reform Act of 1976, which gives people a tax break now when they restore landmarks.
All right, what is the advantage then to a person coming in and taking an old house or an old structure and restoring it?
Well, provided that the landmark is in the National Register and it's certified by the State Historic Preservation Officer, those landmarks that are restored, that you can accelerate your depreciation and you can amortize over a 5-year period, and there can be a substantial tax saving to the people who are investing their money in a landmark that's going to be used for some commercial purpose, used for offices as well as for the marketplace. Those buildings, when they're restored, can be restored for less money than you spend on a new building, and they also can be restored in a manner where you can get a tax break from the federal government.
Is that taking hold in Alabama like it is other places in the States?
Yes, it is. The regional magazine, the best-known magazine of the South, recently, about a year ago, had a story about this, and it featured it in the magazine. Alabama was on the cover. Mobile was the cover of how the South was revitalizing and renovating their older neighborhoods.
The South certainly does have a lot of history, doesn't it? A lot of heritage to keep and to restore.
Well, I'm prejudiced, but I would say the South has more history than any other part of the United States, because of the fact that we were able to have more varied craftsmanship and more materials available to build our structures from. We had more wood. Many times we use our native stone, and we could combine those elements in beautiful buildings. And then, because of our Indian heritage and our black heritage and the Confederate States of America really being born in Alabama and really being so vital to the history of all of the South, I think the South has the richest heritage of all.
There's been a movement to conserve inner-city areas. Is that happening here in Alabama?
Yes, it is. It's happening in Montgomery. It's happening even more so.
Why do we need to save the inner city?
We need to save the inner cities because we need to save the streets and the sidewalks and the trees and the atmosphere of an older neighborhood. This is, many young couples feel that this is the best place for them to live and for them to rear their children.
Mr. Floyd, you said that the older structures for commercial use really have tax advantages. What advantages would it be for a young couple, for example, to take an old house or an old structure and to restore it?
Well, at this time, the Tax Reform Act relates primarily to commercial landmarks, but the main advantage to a young couple or a couple of any age to restore a landmark would be that they can do it more cheaply than they can build a new structure. They can do it for 3/4 the cost. On an average, 3/4 the cost of a new building, of a new domestic or residential structure.
And you're not necessarily talking about a house that's on the National Register or a local or state register.
No, because if those houses are used for any revenue-producing purposes, they can get the advantage of the Tax Reform Act. They can do this by having their restoration certified.
And it is possible, and every day I understand you all are working to put more and more houses and more structures on registers.
Yes, we have either in or now nominated more than 2,000 buildings, more than 2,000 individual structures, either in districts or individually registered in the National Register. In addition to that, we have more than 800 in the Alabama Register.
A person who buys an old house could investigate having his house put on a local, state, or national register.
Yes, we'd like very much to receive data from them. We often have it in our files. We have data on more than 10,000 structures in Alabama, but we're uncovering and discovering them all along, and we would like to register more and more of these landmarks.
Jose Silva, and how long have you been catching people in a flying trapeze act?
About 15 years.
How long have you worked with the Latoni family?
5 years.
What is the most difficult thing for you to do?
But difficult? But sometimes everything is difficult. Yeah, sometimes it's easy, and it's I don't know how to explain,
Okay, it seems to me that the catcher gets blamed sometimes if the trick doesn't go well, and then if the trick goes well,
the star gets to take the bow, but not so much you. Are you sort of in the background very much? No? Okay, let me have Mr. Latoni answer that, because you're from Mexico, right? Yes. Okay, and you're thinking maybe he doesn't understand exactly what I'm saying.
We understand, but we cannot explain very good.
He cannot explain very well. Okay, let's turn you around here to the camera. You're Raul Latoni, and you're the star of the Latoni family, the one that taught. There's the star. The future star. Okay, let me introduce Alicia, who's Alicia, who's 9 or 10 years old.
9.
9 years old, and her mother. What's your mother's name?
Silvia. Silvia.
Sylvia.
Silvia.
Sylvia. Okay, Sylvia. Excuse me, but I'm getting a Mexican accent. Okay, you address yourself to what I just tried to mention to your catcher.
Well, there's a lot of difference between the catcher and the flyer. The flyer has to do the trick right, and the catcher has to be right there. Now, this is a matter of time. If I do the trick right and he's not there, he can catch me. Now, if I do the trick right and he's not ready, he can catch me either. It's too late for him, you know? When he realizes it's going to be too late. Now, like I say, it's a matter of time.
Okay, so you're saying that it takes the two of you and both of you have to be perfect.
What going to be? We going to be together at that moment. At that moment, the trick is end. The trick end. The triple somersault end. We're going to be together, right there, to catch it.
How long have you been training your daughter?
Well, she's practicing about 4 years now, and this is the first year she started.
How does it feel?
Kind of spooky.
Slippery?
Yeah.
Now it's sleepy because it's wet there.
Oh, now it's slippery. But when you're doing the performance, do you feel like a star? Do you enjoy yourself?
Yes.
Mrs. Latoni, how many days or how many weeks of the year are you on the road traveling?
52. 52
weeks a year.
That's the whole year?
The whole
Yeah,
year,
whole year. Yeah.
Do you do this every year?
Well,
Yeah. We travel all the time.
How does a 9-year-old girl go to school?
I don't know.
I don't know. She has a correspondence school. We get we live in Tampa, and we have when we have a layoff, they go to school, and then when we go on the road, they send us the books, and we have books, so we can teach what we know, what in the book is, and then when you come back to where we live, they go back to school and they test them.
Ah, so you take tests in Tampa, Florida?
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you do in school being away so much of the year?
I don't know.
What grade are you now?
3rd.
3rd grade.
So
Why?
you're in 3rd grade. So
Why?
you're keeping up or not keeping up?
Not keeping up.
She's doing good. She's doing good now. I see.
You're learning much about the country too, aren't you?
Yes.
What's the favorite place to go?
California.
California.
What's favorite about California?
Because there's some friends there. And I like them.
Speaking of friends, Mrs. Latoni, do you miss your friends or do you have just circus friends?
No, I got a lot of friends in different places. Yeah, and I miss them.
We meet a lot of people and we have
Yeah.
different places.
Not only in the circus.
Not only in the circus, but is the circus like a family? We hear so much about the circus being like a family. Is it?
Yeah.
It's a family. You see now, this big tent here. The big tent is our town. It's our place where we live. We meet everybody every day, seeing the same faces, same. It's a town for us. It's our city or whatever. It's our home here.
And now you have friends in Montgomery. We're going up there on that high trapeze, and I've never done this before, and we're going to film exactly what I do when I do it. What's the first thing I have to remember to do?
Well, like I told you, you keep your arms straight. Don't try to jump over the bar. Because you do, you drop right down the middle of the pedestal, right under the pedestal.
So I must
And
keep
your arms
my
straight.
arms straight.
And go with the bar, along with the bar.
Okay. Do I keep my toes together, my legs
Your
together?
legs straight, yeah. You're gonna be like a bird. Like that.
Okay, and when I come back to the bar, what do I do? Do I keep my legs or my whole body straight? Do I swing?
Your legs in front, and then you go right there over there in front and drop right down to the net. This is you have to do.
How do I land on the nets?
On your back, always on the back, not only legs, on your back, always.
What happens if I land on my legs?
Or you can break a leg, you can go out the net, and you know, it's always on the back. No, another way to go.
Did you ever have anybody try to do this and get hurt?
Yes, most of them get hurt. Most of the attempt who ever attempt, they get hurt. You're lucky, you know.
Yes, I think I'm very lucky.
What? What's that?
Light on the truck when they load the elevator.
Oh, I just turn plug this one. Yeah, turn. Last night we had, because I didn't know I have this. I got a box for it. Yeah. This is what they used to. Yeah. I said,
So I'm gonna walk to the right. Why don't you do that, Loretta?
Bob, what is your particular method to giving someone help with something that's wrong inside of them?
Well, I think the best way to do that is to trace down the source of the problem. The reason it is a problem is because most people can't remember where it is. And it's something in the past, usually, that's coming back to bother them in the present. So I use the pendulum method, which we'll get into in a little bit, to uncover these things that are basically unconscious and bring them back to the consciousness.
What causes problems that we have these days, psychological problems? A lot of people seem to be seeing psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors. What's the cause of it all?
Well, of course, you can't make a general statement on that. But usually it's something that's occurred that has created a behavior pattern. Most of these things work on a stimulus response basis. You've got a particular stimulus, which could be an event, a person, a situation, and a particular response, which could be like an upset stomach, a headache, or anxiety, a phobia. And these things come from the past, and they cause problems.
And what you use is something like this, a pendulum.
Right.
Now, there have been books and articles written on the pendulum, many of them attributing the use of a pendulum to something of the supernatural, energy forces. What's your explanation, and why does the pendulum work for you?
Okay. Well, the pendulum is really quite simple. It's nothing more than a little weight attached to a string that you hold in between your thumb and forefinger. Okay?
Whoops. All right.
Now, the subconscious, of course, controls autonomic processes such as heart rate, respiration, body temperature, muscle structures. All right, it can also control voluntary muscles to a certain extent. So when you ask your subconscious mind a question and you work out a code with this, you make a yes or a no or I don't want to answer or maybe. It's got 4 ways it can swing. And it simply slightly moves those muscles in your arm and hand in order to swing in a definite response pattern.
Now, this can be done without any kind of conscious movement. In other words, I can consciously concentrate on not moving this.
Right. Matter of fact, that's what you want. You don't want to consciously move it. There are
Right.
4 basic movements that it can move. It can swing back and forth towards you. It can swing side to side, swing clockwise and counterclockwise. So what you start out doing, you consciously swing them through those 4 movements.
Okay, and I want it to swing, say, counterclockwise for a yes, and clockwise for a no, and back and forth for I don't know, and no. This way for I don't know. And then this way for
I don't want to answer.
I don't want to answer. Now, what again is the purpose of this? What are you trying to do using the pendulum?
Okay, the purpose is you're trying to consciously identify things in your mind that you've forgotten that are causing problems today. Your subconscious is aware of where all these things are located. And so by using this method, you can get a general idea of where you have to go to find a particular problem source, a particular stimulus response cluster, as I call it.
And in this way, your subconscious can tell you things that your conscious mind can't remember.
Correct.
Or that is blotted out of your conscious mind. Things that may be the sources of problems.
That's right. It can identify them because it knows where they are, and it can give you an accurate response about what the problem is.
So where do you take it from the pendulum? Where do you go after there?
Okay.
Do you just keep using that, or do you go into other methods?
All right. Well, once we identify where the problem is located, a general idea, doesn't even have to be specific, then we use hypnosis, which is nothing more than focused attention to bring this information back to the surface, to put it back into the attention field and explore it, whether the problem was when you were 3 years old or 15 or whatever. Under hypnosis, which we call as highly heightened because of the focused attention, you can bring back whatever incident or event occurred, explore it, and usually by doing that, you solve the problem.
How does the world of psychiatry respond to something like this?
Well, some psychiatrists use it, others don't. Many psychiatrists aren't up on hypnosis methods, and they don't use it. And of course, it's just like the biggest proponents are the ones that know the least about it. Other psychiatrists and clinical psychologists and counselors who have been working in these methods find that it works, and they use it.
How does this differ from psychiatry as it exists today?
Well, of course, traditional methods involve you coming in and talking about your problems, and the psychiatrist or psychologist helping you analyze them and see relationships that way. But of course, that takes a lot of talking and a lot of time. This way, usually, I work from the basis that if you ask the mind, who knows better? My mind doesn't know as well as your mind does where a particular problem source is. So rather than you coming in and talking to me over a long period of time, which I have done that in the past with various problems, we just get right in and identify the problem source, go back to it, and remove it.
But with the interstate problems that we're having, we have a problem of either we're going to have to concentrate on the interstate or the secondary, the rural roads. Concentrating on the rural roads creates a problem because of the complaints that you have and also the people stranded on the interstate. But of course, when we are there concentrating on the rural highways, this is where our accidents and injuries and fatalities are occurring for the most part. But then, of course, we do have the additional problems on the interstate. So he has asked for 142 additional troopers for an interstate patrol. So these would be out there monitoring the traffic as well as, which of course just being there will slow the traffic down, but then to provide assistance to the motoring public who are broken down and of need of assistance on the interstate. But that would be for 142 additional troopers.
What about equipment? How much new cars and such do you need?
Well, I don't have the breakdown of the exact number, but most of our cars are reaching the point of 100,000 miles and are in desperate need of a replacement. So, and of course, when you start figuring a car and the equipment that goes with it, you're talking about $7,000 to $8,000, and as a result, you've got to provide for replacing the ones that we have that 100,000 miles, plus you'd have to have the necessary number of cars for the interstate patrol, and it would take a car per man for this detail.
How many cars were you able to purchase this year?
With the budget that we're going to have this year, $20.7 million, we're going to be able to purchase 4 new automobiles.
What about personnel besides actual troopers on the road? Are you going to need many more of those?
Total number of personnel that the colonel has asked for is 279 total. There would be a total of 205 troopers, 142 of those on the interstate, and then 63 of these would be to fill vacancies throughout the rural counties of the state where people have retired or resigned. And then, of course, there's 74 civilian positions. This is radio operators, radio engineers, mechanics, and support personnel.
What is the most important thing that you have asked for, or the most necessary thing that you have asked for? This means we're just letting the public be aware that we are unsatisfied with the negotiations as they are now. The contract, we've been working with a contract that has expired back in July. We've tried to bargain with the agency. Every time we go into negotiations, they back off from the table. They're not given an inch, and it's just unfair to the controllers.
What are you bargaining for?
Equipment, more staffing, national bidding. Basically, this is it. And developmental controllers are working FPL positions, which is not really the best situation in air traffic.
Do you think that the lack of staff that you have it could affect the safety of aircraft that are using airports?
With staffing being short, it could be a consideration, yes.
How long do you plan to picket?
We're picketing today, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
What about wages? What about job conditions? What are you asking for in this area?
We cannot negotiate salary. It all comes from Congress, and we fall under the civil services. So we are governed by the